Welcome to Inside AI, a podcast from the EPFL AI Center. I'm your host, Marcel Salate, professor and co-director of the EPFL AI Center. Each episode brings you fascinating discussions with brilliant minds from EPFL and across the global AI community. From groundbreaking algorithms to ethical considerations, from technical innovations to real-world applications, we explore the technology that's transforming our world. Whether you're an AI researcher, industry professional, or simply curious about the technology that's shaping our future, join us as we venture inside AI. Today I'm speaking with Nicholas Christakis. Nicholas is a sociologist and physician who conducts research in the areas of social networks and biosocial science. He directs the Human Nature Lab at Yale University. Nicholas is the author of 4 books, including Connected, a book about human social networks, and Blueprint, which is about the evolutionary origins of a good society. He's authored hundreds of scientific articles, many of which have become classics. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We talked about how adding even simple forms of AI into human interactions can change how we cooperate and communicate with each other. Nicholas spoke about experiments from his lab that showed how small tweaks in AI behavior, like adding vulnerability or humor, can make groups of humans perform better or worse. We also talked about what AI could mean for healthcare, social behavior, or even our future evolution. As you will be able to hear, we had great fun recording this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Well, Nicholas, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcel.
So let's dive right in. And since this is the AI Center podcast, probably that's the best way to start. So you've done some really exciting work over the years. You've been at the forefront of these so-called hybrid systems, right? Human and AI. And if I understand your work correctly, your suggestion is that this can basically alter quite significantly how we interact together as humans. But, and this is the big but, right? If it's the right kind of AI. Is that the correct interpretation? And can you tell us a bit more about that?
I could come back to one of the overarching ideas, which is relates to the extent to which the design of artificial intelligence systems, which systems are intended to act socially. So, for example, if you have an artificial intelligence system that interprets radiological images or that identifies weeds in fields and uses laser to zap the weeds, those are not social AI agents. I'm talking about AI agents which specifically are designed to interact with us socially. This could include things like autonomous cars, right? Because driving is a kind of social interaction where there are humans and cars on a highway, or automated, or humanoid robots on factory floors where there are humans and robots right next to the humans, or checkout counters where the social interaction is between a customer and a machine, for example. So it's those kinds of, or online bots, for example, would be a very standard example everyone understands now. So it's social performance by AI that I'm concerned with, not the weed whacking or radiological, application of AI and machine learning. I'm interested in the effects of such AI in what I would call hybrid systems of humans and machines. And let me just give a toy example to help fix listeners' minds. When you buy a digital assistant like an Alexa, the manufacturer of that device is very focused on the human-machine interaction. And so that machine might be optimized for the human user. For example, you would never buy the machine if every time you had to talk to it, you had to say something like, excuse me, Alexa, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. If you don't mind, would you please tell me the weather tomorrow? This would be an absurd level of obsequiousness, and you would not purchase a device like that. You expect to be able to say, Alexa, weather, and it just obediently responds. And that's fine until you bring that machine into your home and your children learn to be rude to that machine. And then they go to the playground and they are rude to other humans. So what my laboratory has been studying is human-human interaction in the presence of machines. And what kind of programming of these AI endowed agents, these machines, can optimize human performance and human experience? And last, I would just say that for some prior work we've done on the evolution of human sociality that I've been doing in my group for a long time now, one of the arguments is, and we can explore it if you want, is is that I would say that if we want to have a utopian rather than dystopian future, as we add AI agents into our midst, interacting with us socially, those agents ideally should be programmed in a fashion that is in keeping with certain evolved capacities that human beings have. And to the extent that those agents respect our innate sociality, I think then they can help achieve a better future. And to the extent that they do not, I think they could harm us.
Okay. So yeah, this is definitely, I think, an avenue I want to go down on. But let's maybe just split this up a little bit. So on this sort of good outcome, I mean, my understanding is, right, some of your work shows that if you sort of have the right kind of AI in that sense, right, one that is nice, one that apologizes, and so on, this can actually enhance human cooperation. Can you say a few words about that? How that works?
Yeah. So we've been doing a number of experiments over the years. Our first paper was published in 2017 in the journal Nature. And in that paper, we had 4,000 research subjects that were dropped into 230 groups. And those humans were given a collective action problem. So a lot of our experiments have to do with how do we get groups to coordinate better or cooperate better or navigate better or communicate better. So we have a group of humans and they are facing a challenge, a collective action challenge or a social dilemma. And the question is, uh, how can we get those humans to be better able to solve that challenge using AI? So in that first experiment that we published, the humans were put into groups and they had to, we borrowed an idea, a classic idea from computer science called the graph coloring problem. The graph coloring problem is a problem in which you have a network, and the question is, how do you assign colors, a minimal set of colors to every node in the network such that no two adjoining nodes have the same color? And every graph will have something called a chromatic number, which is the minimum number of colors needed to color the graph in this fashion that minimizes conflicts. And this can be used as a model system for studying human coordination. So you can put a group of 20 people into a network and say to them, okay, each of you is randomly assigned, let's say, 3 colors, and you all have to now pick colors dissimilar from your neighbors. And at initiation, there's going to be color conflicts. Like I'm yellow and you are red, and another neighbor of mine is yellow. I should switch to green. If I switch to green, then I won't be in conflict with my yellow and red neighbor anymore. So, uh, so that's what we did. We dropped the people into these networks. We said to them, you have 5 minutes. You have a random color to start. These are the 3 color choices you have. You each have to pick a color dissimilar from your neighbors. And if you, by the end of the experiment, have all picked colors dissimilar from your neighbors, you'll get paid. So this is a model for coordination. Like, how does this group coordinate? And you can think of it as a model, for example, for avoiding traffic jams. Like, how can a group of people leaving their homes, if they stagger their departures, there'll be no traffic jam. Everyone will have a great commute. But if they all leave at the same time, then there's a huge traffic jam. So they need to coordinate their efforts. And it has to be done in a decentralized fashion. Each person only has limited information about their own color choice and their immediate neighbors. There's not a policeman or a judge that's assigning everyone colors, which would solve the problem. We don't want that. That's trivial if there's like an omniscient entity that looks down and does it. So, and what we did in that experiment is, because we were sneaky, we replaced some of the humans with bots, and we endowed the bots with some very simple forms of artificial intelligence. I can digress again. I know I'm talking a lot, but I can digress again and say that my lab is not a computer science lab, so we are not interested in developing super smart AI to replace human
No,
cognition.
you're just trying to understand their effect.
Yes, but also we're not trying to develop, for example, AlphaGo or AlphaFold or ChatGPT these very sophisticated models. We're not trying to develop super smart AI to replace human cognition. We are inventing dumb AI to supplement human interaction. And the AI can afford to be very simple precisely because it's enmeshed within a group of intelligent humans. All the AI has to do is be like a catalyst, like the platinum in an organic chemistry reaction. It just has to lower the activation energy and allow the humans to solve their own problem because they're sufficiently smart. They just need a little lubrication, a little catalysis. And furthermore, these forms of AI can afford to be very simple and dumb, which is beneficial because it's also more transparent to us, right? Like we can use this as a model system for us understanding how even more complicated AI might work. Anyway, in the graph coloring problem, we just added a little noise. So all we did is we made the bots every second and a half, they would look at their neighbors and they would pick the color that minimized conflicts. Those were the perfect bots. But in some of the branches of the experiment, we tweaked the bots so that every second and a half, they looked at their neighbors, they picked the color that had the fewest conflicts with whichever neighbors they had, but 10% of the time they make a random color choice. Or 30% of the time they had a random color choice. And we found that if you program the bots to have a little bit of noise, it unlocked the ability of the group to solve the problem. It's like simulated annealing or mutation in biology or noise in search, right? A little noise often helps a system to reach a new and better equilibrium. And so we showed that worked and that this could be a model for AI in hybrid systems. Like these AI agents acting in this trivial way could help the humans to help themselves, to solve a coordination problem. And that was our first paper in 2017. And since then, we've tackled a number of other challenges. You mentioned one. Let me give that example, and then I'll shut up. That example was a paper we published in PNAS, like I think it was in 2020 or maybe 2021. I don't remember anymore. In that paper, we partnered with Brian Scazzoletti's group. He's a roboticist at Yale, and this paper was spearheaded by Maggie Traeger. The other paper I just mentioned on graph coloring was spearheaded by Hiro Shirato, who now does human-computer interface at Carnegie Mellon University. Maggie is now at Notre Dame. Anyway, in this new experiment, what we did is we had humanoid robots, and we formed groups of 3 humans and a humanoid robot. The 4 of them were working together, and they each had a tablet computer. And we devised a little game on the tablet which involved laying railroad track from point A to point B, and they were like pieces of straight track and pieces of left bending track and pieces of right bending track, and they had to take turns, the humans and the 3 humans and the robot, laying the track from point A to point B. And then we sneakily devised so that sometimes it was impossible to solve the problem, like they weren't the right pieces. Of course, the humans didn't know this. And then what we experimented with, what we manipulated with, was the form of communication by the humanoid robot. For example, did the humanoid robot occasionally tell dad jokes? Did he tell stupid jokes kind of jokes that fathers often, are supposed to
I don't know
say?
what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. My children hate it when I tell dad jokes. I love dad. I think they're great. So, exactly. So we would have the robot tell dad jokes, or we would have the robot express vulnerability. So very simple modification of the communication strategy of the robot. For example, every round, the game lasted several rounds as they laid the tracks. The robot might say, we have reached the 4th round. We did not succeed in connecting A and B. So very, neutral, kind of robotic kind of speech. Or the robot, some groups were randomly assigned to get a robot in which the robot say, on this round, I made a mistake and we did not succeed in, so the robot, instead of using the passive voice and saying a mistake was made, the robot expressed vulnerability and said, I made a mistake. And what we studied was how the humans communicated with each other when we manipulated how the robot communicated. So we weren't interested in the human-robot communication. We were interested in the human-human communication in the presence of robots. And what we found was that we could increase the volume of human speech, the quality of human speech, and the satisfaction of the humans with this trivial, again, dumb AI manipulation of robot speech. So those are two experiments. We've done many more that explore these hybrid systems of humans and
All right.
machines.
And so when you look at these new types of, AI systems that basically just barge through all the tests, right, of intelligence that we have, Turing test and so on. What's your hunch here? If you would repeat these experiments and you would plug in a, I don't know, a Claude 3.7 or a GPT 4.5, or take the latest and greatest, what would happen? Would the outcome be in any way different, you think?
Well, it's hard to predict, and that's part of the thing about experimental control. First of all, one of the reasons tactically as a scientist, and I know you do this too in your own research, you have to think about where's the opportunity for me to make a contribution, and in what way might my contribution be lasting and stand the test of time? And in what way might I make a discovery or an observation about the world that is a fixed observation? And one of the reasons that I have not been studying the performance of LLMs is that they keep changing. Like if we used, ChatGPT 3 in an experiment, by the time we published the paper, whatever we found, it'd be ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 5. And furthermore, the ChatGPT is changing all the time, but my interest is in the humans whose psychology is invariant and doesn't change. So I'm interested in what the humans are doing in the presence of the AI, not what the AI is doing or how the AI is working. And one of the reasons is this sort of tactical reason, or this sort of methodologic standpoint reason. The other reason is that these systems are opaque. So, it's really not clear to me that different instances of ChatGPT or Claude would perform the same in these groups. Maybe sometimes they might evince Machiavellian intelligence. Maybe they would, for their own reasons, try to subvert the functioning of the group, for instance, in ways we don't know how or why or anticipate that they're going to do. So I guess what I would say is these more complex models are more difficult to study, but I suspect that they would in fact be much more powerful,
Hmm.
and could actually, and it has now, there other people have done experiments that have shown, for example, David Rand's group at MIT has shown that you can use you can use LLMs to reduce conspiratorial thinking. That these LLM agents can customize their persuasion to persuade people who believe in a conspiracy to believe in it less, which is magnificent. That's great that work is being done. But we don't exactly know how they're doing it. And we also don't know, the same system could increase conspiratorial thinking, could make people more conspiratorial. So I don't have an answer for you. I'm not able to make a generic statement about how these LLMs, I guess I can say in my view, they would be more powerful for sure, but I cannot make a standard prediction about them for all the reasons I just mentioned
Okay.
about what they do in the groups.
Yeah, no, that's clear. But if so, I mean, I'm a lot involved in discussions where people come and they present some sort of situation where a bunch of people get together and make a collective decision, right? It's, you can think of it in a legal context, you can think of it in a democratic context, you can even think of it in a business context. Would it be, and of course, oftentimes now the question is, right, would it benefit our decision making if we actually brought an AI into this group, right? And I just wonder if one could give a
Yes,
relatively generic answer to that, or if the answer will just always be, well, it depends.
I think in general, I mean, look, the part of the thing is, see, the AI is having multiple effects. First of all, it can function as a kind of human-wide brain. Like if you ask me, would a group with access to Wikipedia make better decisions than a group without access to Wikipedia? My prediction would be that the addition of knowledge would be helpful. Now, there might be some decisions in which the addition of all that knowledge would be distracting, right? Everyone would go down these Wikipedia, rabbit holes and be unable to make a decision. right? I mean, I think some people have shown that there's an optimal amount of information that is ideal for group decision making. You know, no information is bad, too much information is bad. There's probably a sweet spot. So maybe there's some experiments you could do where giving people access to Wikipedia would overwhelm them and they'd be stymied and unable to make any decision. So no, adding knowledge would not be good, let's say, in that situation. But in general, I think we would say that the addition of knowledge is useful. So for example, to the extent that the AI is adding knowledge, I would say that that's a good thing. I would say that it would improve human decision making. In addition, as some of the experiments I just summarized for you, some types of AI would enhance the ability of the group to work together. So that function, that social function of the AI, which is different than the knowledge function of the AI, could be useful. In addition, the AI might have its own, it might not just be like a dumb encyclopedia simply providing information. It might have its own agency, quote unquote, and that might be another contribution it might make. It might, say, well, I've studied, quote unquote, this problem, and I think we should do this, which has nothing to do with its social interactions, and it's not simply an information provision function. So I think if you asked me, do I think in general that the addition of AI to human groups is more positive than negative, I would say yes. But I would also say that we have found many cases in which AI can subvert altruistic tendencies in groups. For example, we have this other game that we played, another experiment we just published a year or two ago. We, again, with Hiro Shirato at CMU, we set up a diorama in the laboratory, and we had two robot-controlled cars, a yellow car and a blue car on opposite ends of a roadway. And then we connected these robot-controlled cars to a software platform we have called Breadboard that allows for distributed experimentation with subjects around the world. And you can use online labor markets like Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific and so on. So we recruited research subjects to drive these little robotic cars in physical space. And we had them play the game of chicken. Okay, so they were driving straight to each other. And if neither one swerves, they'll crash in, and then they get the worst payoff. They get nothing. If one of them swerves, the one that didn't swerve gets the bigger payoff, and the swerver gets the less payoff. If both of them swerve, they both get a bad payoff. So really every human being playing the game of chicken, especially if it's a repeated game, which is, by the way, what we had them do, knows that the optimal solution is to take turns. You drive straight away on this time, and I'll swerve, and next time you swerve, and we'll take turns, and we'll get the maximum payoff. So that was the setup. And then what we did is we added dumb AI to the vehicles, automated braking and automated steering. We actually had a 2x2 factorial design where we added both. We also added communication, whether the people could communicate with each other. But to make the long story short, what we found was when we added automated steering, the people got lazy and never bothered to talk to the other person or take turns. The cars just kept swerving. Both cars swerved and avoided each other. And then we turned the automated steering off, and we found that the people's ethical chip had degraded. They never recovered the ability to take turns or be altruistic with each other. They just kept behaving in this foolish way. So that's an example of an experiment about how the AI, when added to a human group, corroded pre-existing norms of reciprocity that we humans have naturally manifest, that we, in fact, in my judgment, evolved to have.
All right, super interesting. So you mentioned this work from David Rand, and I've seen other work in a similar context, like the power to convince. Right, it's just quite incredible for all the various reasons.
Although, just to interrupt you, Marcel, I wonder whether that's only temporary, because I wonder whether, in a year or two, everyone will become deeply suspicious. For example, I've noticed this incredible improvement in the language, length, and content of emails I get from students in foreign countries seeking jobs in my lab.
Yes.
And you've noticed this too?
Yes, they're all extremely well written now.
Yeah, so I think they fed my lab website into some AI model, and they said, write a 5-paragraph letter to Professor Christakis that summarizes his work and why I would be a good fit. And there's some things that are very subtle about these letters which are telltale to me. And I'm now I'm become quite cynical, and I don't like this. Like, I'm thinking, if you're not willing to spend the time to actually read some papers of mine and craft your own letter to me, why the hell should I read this thing of yours, let alone respond to you, right? Like, there's some authenticity like that I want from a real human written email now. So as I've become aware that so much of this is being written by AI, it could be that we all just start ignoring now altogether these emails, or we discount them.
Yeah.
So, and because we're suspicious now, right? So they're not persuading us. They're having the opposite effect. Instead of being persuasive, they're now not, they're unpersuasive.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. And that reminds me of this fact that even when these experiments where you ask people, give them two images and you ask them which one was generated by AI, you increasingly have to actually add some sort of fault to the image, right? Because the image generation is now so good that people just look at which image looks more perfect. That's probably the AI. And now you sort of add the human fault, if you will, back to the image to trip the human looking at the images. So that's interesting dynamics going on there.
Yeah, it's like the Japanese aesthetic philosophy of wabi sabi, right? Like in the European tradition of beauty, we have the topiary at Versailles. These perfect, the plants are trimmed to be spheres or pyramids. The bushes, or the pottery. The china, the plates are all perfectly symmetrical and perfectly painted. But the Japanese aesthetic is very different, right? You have this bonsai tree, which is, asymmetric and broken, and or you have these broken bowls. Like they cost a million or two or $10 million for a very plain bowl that that actually you have to have the aesthetic where you see, oh my God, that's beautiful, this made by hand thing. Uh, so
Yeah.
so yeah, I think AI is rediscovering wabi sabi. It's
Yeah.
um,
But I would still say there's something, right? When you interact with a bot, even when you know, right, it's a bot because you're just, you interact with ChatGPT. I mean, there's something about the way it starts to mirror the way you articulate things, the way it's not judgmental, the way it appreciates your point, right? I think there's just hijacking some hardware in our brains that is just hard to avoid, even if I'm fully conscious that I'm talking to a machine. That makes me more open, or let's say that the human is typically not capable of. I mean, some humans of course are great at that, right? They just lure you in, they meet you where you are, and great salespeople. But the vast majority of us doesn't really have this talent, and they just have it out of the box, right?
well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, randomized controlled trials are being done right now with large language model therapists, and I think it's quite likely that 10 minutes a day, even when the human knows are talking to a machine, might be quite beneficial for certain kinds of mental illness compared to, weekly 1 hour therapy. Uh, and maybe that'll even be sustained. Maybe the RCT will show that that's helpful now. Maybe there's someone would say, well, that's just because it's novel. There's a lot of novelty now. Maybe in 2 years that won't work anymore. I think it might. I don't know what the RCTs are going to show, but I wouldn't be surprised if they found that 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 large language model therapists are helpful, even if you know that it's a machine. Partly for the reasons that you just described. I mean, some human beings, like it's like I read that in Japan, vending machine technology is incredibly advanced. As some people, you can see online these jokes about, like, you can walk into a store, the whole store is automated. And in Japan, there's so many formalities about social interaction that it can be actually quite laborious. And you might rather like interacting with a machine, or you can just quickly get your business done and you don't have to engage in all these social niceties. So I don't preclude the possibility that even if you know it's a machine, it might be appealing to a human being to interact with a machine.
Yeah.
On this, what I can say is we've done some experiments in my lab, a couple, where we have decrypted. Either we have done the experiment where we employed deception And so we have a hybrid system of humans and machines, and the people, the research subjects in that system, do not know that some of their colleagues are machines. They may think all of them are humans. Actually, ironically, sometimes now they think they're all machines. When the subjects come in, they're like, "You put me in an experiment, and there were no other human beings. They were all those other entities were making such stupid mistakes. They had to be dumb. They were machines or something. Anyway." But usually they feel like they're all humans, but we have secretly replaced some of the humans with bots. In other branches of the experiment, we reveal who's a bot. And what we find is, at least in the limited way, we've only done a couple of experiments like this. What we find so far is that the human beings generally don't mind having some bots in their midst, if they think the bots are beneficent. In other words, if you think the machine means you well, like a ChatGPT therapist or an automated vending machine, you don't mind. It's fine. If, on the other hand, you think the machine is maleficent, then they really hate it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think, and I think that also relates to the fact that, like if a human waiter makes a mistake with your order, you might say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you made a mistake. Could you do it again?" If a vending machine makes a mistake with your order, you might kick the machine, right?
Yeah, we have much less patience
Yes.
with machines. Yeah. But so, I mean, one of the reasons where I find this super interesting, and this is also why I want to talk to you about this, because you're a medical doctor and you, of course, still work a lot on questions of health. So to me, right, what's so fascinating about health, looking at it more broadly, is the fact that our entire medical system at the moment is still largely geared towards fixing things once they're broken. And we all know, right, there would be so much value to be gotten out of prevention. And yet, right, if you look at us as a species broadly, it's quite spectacular at how we fail at this, right? So we know what healthy behaviors are, we know what healthy food is, we know what healthy exercising is. And, I mean, you can look at the ritual, right, every 1st of January. And then you look, right, you go back to people on January 15th and you ask them how things are going, right? And that's always a sad story. But of course, our brain is just doing what it's supposed to do, which is it's working on autopilot, it's saving energy. So I'm wondering, right, could we unlock just massive values with having these convincing AIs in our pocket, trying to get us, with our approval and our knowing, trying to get us on the good path of healthy lifestyles? Is if they can convince me of abandoning a conspiracy theory, don't you think they could convince me of putting down the burger?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if your mother couldn't convince you to sleep right and brush your teeth and, eat a healthy diet, and this is your mother we're talking about, I find it hard to imagine that, that a machine is going to be able to do that. So,
But she'd be in my pocket, right?
yeah, but
This mother GPT.
Your mother was there all the time, while you were a kid, or your father, your children while you were a child. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm open-minded to this. I mean, I have no objections. I mean, I'm not a technophobe. Like, if it works, I'm all for it. If there's an AI-enabled device that can help me to exercise more, like any other tool, I think that would be fine. I mean, I now, are we going to enter a phase? I mean, I don't want to hazard a prediction there. I find it hard to imagine that there's going to be a panacea where these AI agents are able to effectuate behavior change in a way that human interactions could not in the past. But, I've all told you some experiments in which these AI agents improve collective behavior. So, quite likely there will be some AI agents for certain things. For example, like think about those those warning systems that jet fighter jet fighter pilots have, where they're warning about like what's happening in the environment and increasing the safety of the human. Um, maybe there will be some applications like that. Although even there, by the way, when apparently jet fighter pilots, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I've been told sometimes they get so many warnings, they turn off the systems. They can focus on, I can't listen to all this input. I just want to use my eyes right now and to fly the jet and avoid the incoming missile or whatever. So, I don't
Yeah,
know.
but
Well,
as
I
a
mean, I think that the healthcare applications of I think are going to be uh, initially are going to be certainly diagnostic test interpretation, generation of differential diagnoses. I think areas where humans can at times be inattentive or lack the breadth of vision that an AI agent can give you. And I think what the experiments will show, judging from the past, is that the best performance will be by the combined human, AI assisted human decision making. Probably the experiments will show human decision making is X good, uh, AI decision making is also roughly X good, but human plus AI decision making is X plus delta good, you know,
yeah.
some superior performance.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I just think there's something special there because I mean this is running under the assumption that the human, unlike me, maybe when I was a child with my mother, actually wanted to affect that change, right? And just says, it's actually my own brain here is actually, working against me, right? With I want to eat healthier. I want to do exercise, but my brain tells me no, stay here. It's cozy. There's the couch. There's a good burger joint over there. So right there, of course, having a human that would be with you all the time and say you're doing the right thing, you're doing great, consistency is key. Yeah, that would be great, but that's just not realistic for most of us, right? But the
Yeah,
chatbot
but the
could.
question is the scientific question here is: would you come to ignore this agent just like you ignore, like, how endlessly inventive could this agent be? Would you just after a
Yeah,
while turn it off like the fighter pilot? Like if like the first week or two you had this agent, you would say, "My God, this is miraculous! It's reading all this data from the sensor I'm wearing on my hand and my app, and it's giving me feedback on what I should do." And the first couple of weeks, it's recommending a bedtime for me, and I'm like, it's like magic. How does it know that if I go to bed now, I'll fall asleep quickly and I'll get a good night's sleep? And you use it religiously, and then after a couple of weeks, you're like, I'm bored by this thing, or I don't like this thing, or I don't like my new robot overlord, you know, you
yeah.
know, and so I don't know the answer to these questions, but I think these are empirical questions. Like I'm not rejecting what you're suggesting. I'm just saying I don't know the answer, but I think that answers will come to be known.
Yeah, and yeah, I think they will be interesting. So, but again, coming back to your health angle, so you're a medical doctor, you're also a sociologist. So, where do you see like the most interesting use cases in medicine? I mean, you mentioned some obvious ones, right? Diagnosis, differential diagnosis, diagnostics, and so on. Is there what about sort of the social, right? Since that's also your area, the social aspect, patient to doctor, doctor to doctor, patient to patient. What's gonna?
This is also hard for me to forecast, candidly. I mean, one of my favorite experiments was done by a group in Europe, I think in the Netherlands, although I'm not sure which scientist did this, where they were trying to get shy people to be better at flirting. So they wanted to help people become better at flirting with other human beings. So they developed a chat, like a kind of large language model that would help train you how to be a good flirt, how to pick up men or women. And it worked. People became much better at flirting as a result of using this machine. And so then the people were set loose into the real world to go and actually flirt with other humans. And I think the discovery in this experiment is that the humans preferred to flirt with a machine than with real humans. That actually, it just became so easy and call response and so comfortable and it was messy actually interacting with another human being and having to flirt with a real person who didn't necessarily do the things the way the flirtatious robot. So they fell in love with the machine. Okay, was the outcome of this experiment. I think I've summarized the broad outlines of this experiment correctly.
And people are asking why the birth rates are dropping, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, so, I don't know, whether the these agents, these social, like if you're saying the social applications in medicine, it's hard for me to predict whether people would. Uh, I was going to say before I told you the flirtation example that I don't think that these AI agents will be able to perform the social functions of healthcare providers precisely because medicine is such a high touch. Medicine and nursing are such a high touch thing. You want the other human being to empathize with you. I'm primarily a research scientist, but as you alluded to earlier in my life, I was a hospice doctor. I took care of people who were dying. That's a very high emotional intensity, very poignant, very powerful moment in a family's life when a loved one is dying. And, they want you present and listening and empathizing and communicating and putting your hands on the patient and examining them, right? This is what the clinical care is all about in that situation. So I was going to say in response to your question that I find it hard to imagine that any kind of agent could fill that need. But then I thought of this flirtation example, and I thought, well, maybe they would prefer a robotic doctor, to a real doctor. So again, I think it's an empirical question. Here, I'll tell you, this is a little bit similar to about 20 years ago, or approximately or more, there was a big debate about sex robots. And some people thought like humanoid robots, like physical, instantiate, forget the flirtation robots. And there was a big debate about whether sex robots would improve or degrade the human condition. In other words, some people thought if you have these sex robots, people could learn to be better lovers and they could lose their inhibitions and or they could experiment with sexual practices they might otherwise never experiment with. And this would be freeing to the human spirit and enhance their interactions, with other humans after they had this exposure to the robot. That's one group of people had that argument. A completely different group of people took the completely opposite point of view. They thought this is degrading, absurd. People might come to prefer interacting with a sex robot instead of a real robot. To my knowledge, no one ever did experiments with that. But you can see in that example the kind of strands of technophilia and technophobia probably that are present with any technology and that I think are remanifesting themselves in the whole conversation we're having about AI right now, in the early days of these, very powerful models that we are seeing.
Yeah. Do you think there's a value? I mean, so you mentioned right early on your interest is in the human, and you're very carefully interjecting a piece of machine, as it were, into those interactions to understand the human interactions better. But then at the same time, right, if we maybe project a little bit outwards into what's going to happen and we sort of go into this agentic world, right, where more and more of these bots and agents start working with each other, and we get perhaps increasingly to situations where there's groups of machines actually where you're now inserting a human for whatever reason. Is it is it like, is that of interest to study as well, to use the sort of almost like the machine behavior in that sense, or are you?
I think that's very interesting.
Mhm.
And I published a paper along with Iyad Rawan at the Max Planck in Berlin and a bunch of other scientists. There were like 20 of us on the authorship list. Ian Kuzin, another Max Planck guy, um, and a bunch of other co-authors on a paper in Nature, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago called Machine Behavior, in which we basically borrowed some ideas from zoology to say, we need to treat these machines as if they are animals, actually, and borrow some old ideas about the study of the behavior of these animals and animals in groups. And so I absolutely think that is interesting scientifically. I think there will be some discoveries there. It's not something I'm doing for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I'm not the best person for that. I'm not a roboticist. I'm not a computer scientist. And my gaze is more to the human anyway. But I don't think it's a bad topic of research, and I don't think it's devoid of interest. And I actually do think, I mean, we could have an argument about this too. Maybe we're anthropomorphizing these machines and wrongly thinking of them as having
Mhm.
like you said, agentic agents. maybe that's the wrong conception. We don't even want to think of them as having agency. Maybe it's wrong to think of them as behaving. Maybe it's just us taking our primitive, organic, you know, vision of what it means to have agency and behavior and applying it where it doesn't belong at all. I mean, that's the lens we're using, but
Yeah.
it's, I could see that. I mean, I had an interesting conversation with a Dartmouth psychologist, Peter Tsay, who studies octopus consciousness.
Okay.
There's a big debate right now. I mean, there's a huge ongoing debate, philosophical and biological and psychological, about what is consciousness, what's the origin of consciousness, where in our brain is it, how did it come about, what evolutionary purpose does it serve? I mean, why are we conscious? I mean, it must have increased our fitness from a Darwinian point of view. And and how you define it. Does it have self-awareness? Does it have, temporal persistence? There's like a lot of complicated ideas about consciousness. But people are increasingly thinking that octopuses, from which we diverged 500 million years ago, might have independently evolved consciousness. It's not like, well, do chimps have consciousness and we have consciousness, or even do elephants? And by the way, I do think elephants are conscious, and we diverged from elephants about 90 million years ago. But really, this invertebrate, the octopus, is consciousness. And then what Peter was telling me is, he said, but you see, the thing is, its consciousness might be different than ours. I mean, we're using the word consciousness, but it might have a completely different consciousness. And so here, I think, again, when we use some of these words like agency and behavior to apply to machines, we may be deluding ourselves from the outset, right? We may be actually stupidly forswearing a kind of understanding we could get about these machines if we didn't approach them, but maybe it's impossible for us not to do this, if we didn't approach them from our own human-centric point of view.
Yeah. But would you perhaps sort of as an intermediary path, like you say, okay, look, my main interest is in the human. I'm fascinating, right, by this new crop of models, these reasoning models, and where you can now, right, even finally see the reasoning strands.
Oh,
And
no, hold on. Are we really seeing the reasoning strands, or is it's like, when my dog acts guilty when I, say, Luna, did you eat, did you jump on the counter and eat the loaf of bread? And the dog looks at me like it has knowing guilt.
yeah.
Does the dog have knowing guilt, or has the dog evolved to know that if it gives this face when I use that tone of, is it a behavioral conditioning?
Exactly. But so in some sense, right, we are actually learning there through your dog something about humans. And so maybe, right, in the same way that we can look at how these things reason, and there's this interesting research from Anthropic and others where they say your task, right, is actually to do something bad and not have the human figure out what it is. And then you sort of see how they're trying to do that. I mean, can that teach us something about humans as well?
Yes. Yes, I think that's very subtle and correct what you just said. And I think yes, I think we can learn about humans using that approach that you just described, actually. Just like as you suggested, like with the dog example, we learn more about how humans have expectations of guilt and expectations of penance when we see what the dog is doing.
Doing,
Yeah.
yeah. Good. So I'm mindful of your time. Maybe just two questions to close. One is, I mean, you're incredibly, um, y- you know, multifaceted, right? Your research. I mean, you're a medical doctor. You're doing network science. You're working with AI. You're doing sociological science. How do you think about in this world that seems to go in the other direction, right, of hyper specialization? um, what sort of what's the best way to think about multi interdisciplinary for especially also for younger people, right, sort of looking into the future of this AI driven world? Is that is your career one that's actually a one off, or I mean, I think it should be actually more the standard, but I'm worried we're going increasingly in the other direction.
Well, I would have two responses to that. The first thing I would say is that all those examples you mentioned of work that my lab does plus some others you didn't mention. For example, we do some work on the microbiome and how microbes spread within people. We've developed some new interests in human social chemosignaling. So we do a lot of work with volatile organic compounds and how humans might use those. All of those things, of course, that we do are seemingly very dissimilar and in different areas of science. And that's true, I suppose, to some extent. But what they're all united by is an interest in human social interaction. I mean, that's what my group studies, is human social interaction. And how do we form networks? What does the fact that we form networks mean for our ability to disseminate innovation? How can this be exploited in global health field trials? Like, if we understand social networks, can we use mathematical models to pick out structurally influential individuals such that if we train these 3 women to breastfeed their baby in this village, all the other women will copy them, for example? That's about social networks and social interaction. Or the microbiome, how does it spread? Or human AI interaction, or human chemosignaling. So we do have some focus in the lab. I mean, we're working in these many areas, but all of it is about social interaction. So in that sense, I'm narrow, right? Like, that's the one thing I've spent the last 30 years of my life studying. But I study all aspects of that. Anything that has to do with that is what I study. And I think that, first point. Second point I would make is, it's an extraordinary privilege to be a scientist. Like, I often wonder, because I'm not Galileo or Newton or Darwin, right? Like, those figures, I think, rise to, or Leonardo da Vinci, these people rise to the top in any epoch. But Nicholas, born 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, I don't think could have been a scientist or would have been a scientist in that world. I think, if I was lucky, I would have been a blacksmith, some technical knowledge, working with my hands, being creative and inventive, if I was lucky. If not, I could have been a serf, who the hell knows? And so I happened to be born in the late 20th century when institutions like universities existed and when science had been institutionalized such that people like you and me, who are smart and creative and curious, had an outlet for that intelligence and curiosity and could find employment, useful employment, and make a contribution to society, as I believe we do. Which, by the way, is why I'm so concerned right now with the assault on science that's taking place in the United States, which is going to kill the golden goose, the goose that laid the golden egg. I think scientific advances for the last 200 years have lied at the core of our wealth, our health, our security. I mean, science is fundamental to the modern world. And so, so I feel very fortunate to be a scientist. And so, having said that, if you're going to spend your life as a scientist, why not play? Why not also meander a little bit? You're not exactly an engineer. There's nothing wrong with being an engineer, but you're not, you are not solving a narrow problem. You're not designing this widget. You are exploring. Science is about, in large measure or in part, about exploration. And so I think it is useful for a scientist to have a focus, like I mentioned, but also to give your curiosity some free rein. And often the discoveries are made when you least expect it, where you meander into some area, often where there are few other people. It's good if there are a couple of other people there. It's not good if there are none or too many. And then you can make some discoveries. And I'll say one thing about that. That feeling of scientific discovery is unlike any other feeling I have in my life. It could make me weepy just to think about it. That feeling when you, as a scientist, when you actually make a discovery, when you see something no matter how small, that no one else has seen before. Forget seeing the moons around Jupiter or something like that, which is just spine-tinglingly amazing. Just an ordinary discovery. That feeling is so awesome and so spine-tingling and so delicious that once you've had that feeling once, you want it again. You want to go back to that well and drink again. And I've only had that feeling maybe 5 or 6 times in my life where I've really made a discovery, right? I mean, lots of time we just do normal science. We confirm what others have previously seen, or we see something that's very commonsensical. But once in a while, we make a discovery, however small, and I can see from your nodding, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a magnificent feeling, and that's another reason I think to do science, to have that feeling.
And so, what's AI gonna do to that? Um, because there's this notion that eventually we get to a stage where just everything requires so much intelligence that our human brains, right, will not actually be
I mean,
sufficient to.
I don't know about that either, honestly. I am kind of staying out of the prediction business about this. I'll tell you why. I listen to some podcasts where there's super smart scientists uh, and tech billionaires who are saying, you know, AI is the best thing that ever happened to human beings, and it's going to facilitate human cognition, and it's going to lead to a new golden age, and it'll replace a lot of unpleasant or difficult tasks for humans, and it'll be so augmenting in every possible way. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. And then I listen to another podcast with other equally smart scientists and equally wealthy and successful tech billionaires, and they make exactly the opposite argument. They're like, this is a calamity. It's going to lead to, Skynet. We're going to have these machines take over. And I'm like, well, they're also right. And it's like that scene in Fiddler on the Roof when Reb Tevye is arguing in the courtyard and someone says this and he goes, you're right. And then someone says the opposite and Reb Tevye says, you're right. And then a third person says, Reb Tevye, they can't both be right. And he says, you're right too. That's how I feel. I mean, I do not feel equipped. I've listened to both sides of this argument, of AGI and what it means for humanity, both the doomers and the boomers. And I don't know where it's going to shake out. I don't think it's going to adversely affect me in my lifetime, given my age, but I do think it will affect my children for the better or the worse.
Well, what's your gut feeling? Like, do you go to bed at night feeling relatively relaxed about that, or not?
Well,
What does your gut tell you?
I think that the analogy I would use is that the invention of AI, what happened when we domesticated plants and animals, right? That was an epochal development. Actually, we keep pushing it back, but like, let's say 9,000 years ago, or invented cities. When we invent the invention of a city is an enormous invention, or invented written language. These are all enormous, enormous interventions that actually have changed the course of our evolution. In a book I wrote called Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society, I talk a little bit about this, about how these epochal cultural innovations, and actually even lesser innovations like modern medicine, how these things can change the course of our evolution by affecting natural selection. So if you ask me, do I think AI will change the course of human evolution over millennia scale? I think yes. If you ask me, do I think it's going to change, over 100-year scale? I don't think so. I think it's going to be, like, did the steam engine, completely efface our humanity? It changed society. Steam engines changed society and how we live and organize ourselves. But did it change our humanity? And I think the answer on the steam engine question is no. And the answer on the printed book is no. So, I think AI, did electricity change our humanity? The answer is no. No, over thousands of years, electricity will have changed the course of human evolution. But, over 200 years, no is the answer. So I'm not staying up at night worried right now about Terminator.
All right, there's other things to be worried about right now in the short term.
Yes, there are. There are some very serious things to be worried about right now. Yes.
All right, Nicholas, always a pleasure to talk to you. And we could go for much longer, but I want to be mindful of your time. And I know I have the pleasure of meeting you soon again in real life. But thanks very much for this conversation. Really amazing.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you so much. I love the work that you're doing, and I love the fact that you're doing this podcast as well as the science that you do. And I look forward to visiting your lab before long.